Mike Tyson's fist was already clenched when his bodyguard grabbed his shoulder and whispered 3 words that changed everything. "El Mencho's here." Tyson didn't flinch. He turned his neck slow, real slow, and looked toward the back of the restaurant where 6 men in dark suits sat around a table that might as well have been a throne room. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Mexico City legend, a story whispered about for decades, a moment so insane that the people who were there still argue about the details, still swear they saw 2 of the most dangerous men alive almost collide in a private dining room, with no cameras, no referees, and no rules. Let me take you inside that room. It was 2009. Tyson was in Mexico City for a promotional event, something tied to an exhibition tour he'd been doing to keep the lights on after boxing chewed him up and spit him out. The man had burned through $300 million. He'd been to prison. He'd bitten a man's ear off on pay-per-view. And now he was sitting in a high-end restaurant in Polanco, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the capital, eating steak with 2 members of his security team and a local promoter named Raul who'd set up the trip. Tyson was 2 bites into his ribeye when Raul's phone buzzed. Raul looked at the screen. His face went white, not pale, white. The kind of white that tells you someone just received information their body doesn't want to process. Raul set the phone down and leaned across the table. "Mike, we need to leave. Right now." Tyson kept chewing. He didn't even look up. "I'm eating." Raul grabbed his wrist, and if you know anything about Mike Tyson, you know that grabbing Mike Tyson's wrist uninvited is the fastest way to find out what God feels like when he's angry. But Raul was shaking too hard to care about protocol. He pulled Tyson's arm and pointed toward the back of the restaurant, toward a private section separated by frosted glass panels and 2 men standing guard who looked like they bench-press sedans. "That's Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes back there. El Mencho, the head of the Jalisco New Generation cartel." Tyson stopped chewing. "Now let me tell you something. Believe me. In 2009, El Mencho wasn't yet the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere. That title was still a few years away, but he was already running one of the most violent drug organizations on the planet. The CJNG had been building power since splitting from the Sinaloa cartel, and Mencho was the architect. Former police officer, former avocado farmer, former federal informant, some said, the kind of man who could smile at you over dinner and have your entire family vanish by breakfast. The U.S. government would eventually put a $10 million bounty on his head. The Mexican military would send thousands of soldiers after him. They'd never catch him. And he was sitting 30 feet from Mike Tyson. Tyson set his fork down. He looked at Raul. He looked at the frosted glass. He looked at his own hands, the same hands that had knocked out 35 men in a boxing ring. And he did something that nobody at that table expected. He stood up, not to leave, to walk toward the back. Raul nearly fell out of his chair. "Mike, no, you don't understand." "I understand fine," Tyson said. He straightened his jacket. He rolled his neck, and he took 1 step toward the frosted glass partition. Here's what nobody tells you about Mike Tyson in this period of his life. The rage was still there. The explosiveness, the hair-trigger temper, all of it still lived inside him, but something else had moved in alongside it: curiosity. Tyson had become fascinated by power. Not boxing power, not physical dominance, but the kind of power that makes a room change temperature when you walk in. He'd been studying that his whole life without knowing it. Cus D'Amato had it. Don King had it. The men who ran the prisons he'd been locked in had it. And now, sitting behind frosted glass in a Mexico City restaurant, was a man who had more of it than almost anyone alive. Tyson wanted to see him up close. His lead bodyguard, a guy named Marcus who'd been with him for 3 years, stepped in front of him. Marcus was 6'4", 250, and built for exactly this kind of situation. He put his hand flat on Tyson's chest. "Mike, those guys back there have guns, real guns. Not the kind you see in movies. We're not equipped for this." Tyson looked down at Marcus's hand on his chest. He didn't swat it away, he just looked at it. And Marcus, to his credit, read the signal. He removed his hand and stepped aside. Tyson walked toward the frosted glass. Get this. The 2 guards standing outside the private section saw him coming. They didn't reach for weapons. They didn't step forward. They did something more interesting. They looked at each other, because they recognized him. Everyone on the planet recognized Mike Tyson. The face tattoo, the build, the walk that said every step was a decision to not destroy something. These cartel soldiers, Men who'd probably seen more violence than most people could imagine, watched Iron Mike approach them and had a moment of genuine uncertainty. One of them raised a hand. "Senor, this area is private." Tyson stopped. He was close enough now to see through the frosted glass. Shapes, silhouettes. The outline of a man sitting at the head of a table, gesturing with one hand while the other rested on the tablecloth. "Tell your boss Mike Tyson wants to say hello." The guard blinked. He looked at his partner. His partner shrugged. The first guard turned and slipped behind the glass partition. Raoul had followed Tyson across the restaurant and was now standing 5 feet behind him, looking like a man watching his own funeral being planned. Marcus stood at Tyson's right shoulder, scanning the room, counting exits. The rest of the restaurant had gone quiet. Diners at nearby tables had stopped eating. Forks suspended in midair, conversations cut short. Everyone could feel it. Something was happening that wasn't supposed to happen. 30 seconds passed, 45, a full minute. The guard came back. His face had changed. The uncertainty was gone. Something else was there now, not aggression, amusement. "He says, come in." Tyson adjusted his jacket one more time. He cracked his knuckles, not to intimidate, just habit. The same thing he used to do before walking to the ring. And then he stepped past the frosted glass and into the private dining area of the most dangerous cartel boss in Mexico. I swear this happened. The room behind the glass was smaller than you'd think. One long table, 8 chairs, 6 men seated, 2 standing against the wall. The lighting was warm, golden, expensive. Crystal glasses, white tablecloth, a bottle of Don Julio Real in the center of the table that probably cost more than most people's car payments. And at the head of the table, a man in his early 50s, with a compact build, a clean shave, and eyes that didn't move when Tyson entered the room. El Mencho. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He just watched, the way a man watches something he's evaluating, not admiring. Tyson stepped to within 6 feet of the table and stopped. The 2 men against the wall had their hands inside their jackets. Marcus stayed by the glass partition, visibly calculating every possible scenario and hating all of them. El Mencho spoke first. His English was functional, accented, direct. "Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet." Tyson tilted his head. "That's what they used to call me." Mencho picked up his glass of tequila and took a sip. He set it down without a sound. "In my world, they don't give you nicknames. They give you body counts." Tyson didn't flinch. He pulled out the empty chair closest to him and sat down without being invited. Every man at that table tensed. The 2 against the wall shifted their weight forward. Mencho raised one finger, just one, and everyone froze. Now here's where the story gets wild, and I mean genuinely, historically wild. Because what happened next wasn't a confrontation, it wasn't a fight, it wasn't even a threat. It was something far more dangerous. It was a conversation between 2 men who understood violence so deeply that they could talk about it the way normal people talk about the weather. Tyson leaned back in the chair. "I know who you are." "And I know who you are," Mencho said. "I watched every fight, Spinks, Burbick. The first 30 seconds against Marvis Frazier. You were an artist." Tyson's jaw tightened. Nobody called him an artist. Champions, announcers, trainers, they called him a killer, a destroyer, a force of nature. But artist? That word hit different. Because deep down, past the rage and the trauma and the persona, Tyson had always believed that what he did in the ring was art. Customato had taught him that. And here was a cartel kingpin recognizing it. "Cuss would have liked hearing that," Tyson said quietly. Mencho nodded. "Every powerful man had a teacher. Customato made you. My teacher was the streets of Aguililla. Different classrooms, same lesson." "What lesson?" Tyson asked. He leaned forward now. "That fear is a tool. The man who controls fear controls everything. You need to hear this part." Tyson sat with that sentence. He didn't respond immediately. He reached for the bottle of Don Julio in the center of the table. Nobody stopped him. He poured himself a glass. He drank it in one motion, set the glass down. And then he said something that made El Mencho's expression change for the first time. "Fear didn't save me from myself." Mencho's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in recognition. Because El Mencho, for all his brutality, for all the blood on his hands, was also a man at war with himself. The cartel life wasn't sustainable. He knew it. Every cartel boss knew it. You either die, get arrested, or spend the rest of your life running. There's no retirement plan, no golden years. The empire you build becomes the cage that kills you. And Tyson, a man who'd built an empire of his own and watched it eat him alive, had just named the thing neither of them could escape. Trust me on this. The room changed after that line. The tension didn't dissolve, but it shifted. It became something else. Two predators who'd wandered into the same clearing and realized they weren't there to fight. They were there to compare scars. Mencho gestured to one of his men. The man produced a cigar box, Cuban, hand-rolled. Mencho opened the box and extended it toward Tyson. Tyson took a cigar. Mencho took one. A lighter appeared. Both men lit up. For the next several minutes, they talked. And the things they said were so far removed from what you'd expect that Raoul, who'd been allowed to enter the room and was standing against the wall trying not to hyperventilate, later told friends he thought he was dreaming. They talked about pigeons, not drugs, not fighting, not power, pigeons. Tyson had been raising pigeons since he was a kid in Brownsville. It was the one constant in his life, the one thing that never betrayed him, never sued him, never sold a story about him to the tabloids. He'd kept lofts his entire adult life, racing pigeons, tumbler pigeons, high flyers. He could talk about bloodlines and breeding patterns for hours. And Mencho, it turned out, had grown up around birds in Michoacan. Not pigeons specifically, but roosters, songbirds, the whole rural Mexican bird culture that existed in the small towns of western Mexico. He knew the devotion it took to raise animals. He understood the strange peace it gave a violent man. Tyson's eyes lit up when he talked about his birds. His voice got higher. His hands moved differently, not clenched anymore, open, demonstrating wing patterns, describing flight paths. For a few minutes, he wasn't Iron Mike. He was the kid from Brownsville who'd loved something small and fragile in a world that was neither. No kidding. Mencho watched him with something that might have been warmth if it came from a different man. Coming from Mencho, it was closer to fascination. Here was a man who'd terrorized heavyweight boxing, who'd been the most feared human on the planet, and he was sitting in a cartel boss's private dining room, talking about pigeon genetics with genuine joy. Mencho said, "In Aguililla, when I was young, there was a man who kept songbirds, hundreds of them. People said he was crazy. But those birds sang every morning and the whole village woke up to music. When he died, the silence was worse than any grief." Tyson nodded slow. He understood exactly what Mencho meant. The thing you care about most becomes the thing that defines your absence. But then the conversation turned, and when it turned hard. One of Mencho's lieutenants, a younger guy at the end of the table who'd been quiet the entire time, leaned forward and said something in Spanish. Raoul translated it in his head and nearly bit through his own tongue. The lieutenant had said, "Ask him how much it would cost to have him fight one of our guys." Mencho didn't react to the lieutenant's words. He kept his eyes on Tyson. But Tyson had spent enough time around dangerous rooms to know when the dynamic shifted. He saw the lieutenant speak. He saw Mencho's non-reaction, and he read it. "Somebody just said something stupid," Tyson said. Mencho's lip curled. Not quite a grin, just an acknowledgement. "My young friend wants to know if you're for sale." Tyson put out his cigar on the edge of a crystal plate. He pressed it down slow, grinding the ash flat. Then he stood up. The chairs scraped against the floor. The two men against the wall snapped to attention. Here's the thing. Standing up in that room was either the bravest or dumbest thing anyone could do. When you're sitting at El Mencho's table, you leave when he tells you to leave. That's not a suggestion. That's the law of that world. Men have disappeared for less. For a wrong glance, a dismissed phone call, a perceived slight at dinner. The cartel doesn't operate on Western social norms. It operates on respect, and respect is measured in absolute submission to hierarchy. Tyson didn't submit to anyone. He never had. Not to the legal system, not to Don King, not to any opponent, and certainly not to a man who just implied he could be bought. He looked at the lieutenant. The young guy was maybe 30. Gold watch, sharp haircut, the kind of cartel mid-level who'd grown up watching narco culture on TV and thought violence was a personality trait. Tyson locked eyes with him. "I'm not for sale. I've never been for sale. Men who buy other men end up owning nothing." The lieutenant's face went hard. He started to stand. Mencho raised that single finger again. The lieutenant sat back down so fast it was like gravity doubled specifically for his chair. This is real. The air in that room was 1 degree from catastrophe. Tyson was standing, armed men were ready, a cartel boss was calculating, and the only thing keeping everyone alive was the thinnest thread of mutual respect between 2 men who recognized something in each other that the rest of the world would never understand. Mencho stood. Slowly. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'8", 5'9". But when he stood, the room contracted around him. Every man at that table adjusted, not physically, something deeper than that. Their entire orientation shifted toward him as if he exerted gravitational pull. He walked around the table toward Tyson. His men watched. Marcus, back by the glass partition, put his hand on the weapon he wasn't supposed to have, but absolutely did have. Raoul pressed himself against the wall and prayed to every saint he could remember by name. Mencho stopped 2 feet from Tyson. 2 of the most dangerous men alive, standing face to face, close enough to touch. Mencho was giving up nearly 6 inches in height and probably 60 pounds in weight. It didn't matter. Power isn't measured in pounds. Mencho reached out his hand, not in a fist, not holding a weapon, an open hand, extended for a handshake. "You're right," Mencho said. "A man who can be bought has already lost everything." Tyson looked at the hand. He looked at Mencho's eyes. And then he did something that tells you everything you need to know about who Mike Tyson really is underneath the mythology. He took the hand. But he didn't just shake it. He put his other hand on top. Both hands wrapped around Mencho's. A 2-handed grip. The kind you give to someone at a funeral. The kind that says more than words. "Stay alive," Tyson said. 5 syllables, under 15 words. He didn't explain it. He didn't elaborate. He just said it and let it sit. Mencho held the grip for a moment. Then he let go. Tyson turned and walked out, past the frosted glass, past the guards, through the restaurant where every diner was pretending not to stare and failing completely. Raoul scrambled after him. Marcus followed, his hands still inside his jacket, his eyes still counting threats. They hit the sidewalk. The Mexico City night was warm and loud, car horns and music from a club down the street, and the distant rhythm of a city that never fully sleeps. Tyson walked to the SUV that was waiting for them. He opened the door himself. He got in. Raoul climbed in after him. He was sweating through his shirt. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't buckle his seatbelt. "Mike, do you understand what just happened? Do you have any idea who that was? What he could have done?" Tyson looked out the window. The restaurant's neon sign reflected off the glass. "I know exactly who he was." "Then why? Why would you walk in there?" Tyson turned from the window. And this is where you see the man behind the monster, the philosopher behind the puncher, the broken kid from Brownsville who learned to fight because the world gave him no other option. "Because I've been afraid my whole life, Raoul. Afraid of everything, afraid of losing, afraid of being alone, afraid of being the person everyone thinks I am. The only thing I was never afraid of was another man. Any man. Put any man in front of me and I know what I am. That's all I've ever had." Raoul stared at him. Marcus, in the front seat, stared straight ahead and said nothing. The driver pulled into traffic. For what it's worth, that lieutenant, the young one who suggested buying Tyson for a fight, was found dead in Guadalajara 14 months later. Multiple gunshot wounds. The official report called it cartel-related violence. People close to the CJNG said Mencho never forgot the disrespect the young man had shown at that dinner, not toward Tyson, toward Mencho's judgment. By speaking out of turn at his table, the lieutenant had undermined the one thing that kept Mencho in power: absolute authority. You don't suggest business deals in front of a guest without the boss's permission. You don't treat the boss's table like a negotiation floor. The kid broke protocol. And in that world, protocol is the difference between breathing and not breathing. Tyson never spoke publicly about the encounter. Not in interviews, not in his one-man show, not in his podcast years later. The story leaked out through Raoul, who told friends in Mexico City's entertainment scene, who told journalists, who told everyone. But every version was slightly different. In some tellings, Tyson threatened Mencho. In others, Mencho pulled a gun. In one version that circulated through certain corners of the internet, the 2 men actually sparred in the back room. None of that is true. The truth is stranger. The truth is that two men who were built by violence, defined by violence, and ultimately imprisoned by violence sat across from each other and talked about birds, about beauty, about the small, fragile things that kept them human when everything else was trying to strip that humanity away. And then they shook hands and walked away. Think about that. Think about what that means. Two men with a combined body count, direct and indirect, that nobody wants to calculate. Two men who'd each, in their own way, terrorized entire populations, one with his fists, one with his empire. And the moment that defines their meeting isn't violence, it's recognition. The recognition that power at its peak is lonely, that the thing you build to protect yourself becomes the thing that isolates you, that the only people who understand what you are happen to be the people the world says you should never meet. Now listen, there's a reason I'm telling you this story. It's not just because it's wild, although it is genuinely one of the wildest things that's ever happened in a restaurant. It's because this moment reveals something about both men that their public personas would never allow. Tyson, the man the world saw as a mindless destroyer, walked into a room full of armed killers and diffused the situation with emotional intelligence. He read the room. He spoke when speaking mattered. He refused to be provoked, and when the moment came to leave, he didn't run. He offered something genuine to a man who rarely received anything genuine: stay alive. It was a prayer disguised as a statement. And Mencho, the man responsible for mass graves and beheaded rivals and narco banners threatening entire cities, sat with a retired boxer and listened to him talk about pigeons. He recognized artistry in violence. He shared a memory about songbirds. He shook a man's hand with what appeared to be sincerity. It doesn't make him a good person. It doesn't redeem a single thing he's done. But it makes him human. And that's more terrifying than any cartel video you've ever seen. Because humans choosing evil is scarier than monsters being monstrous. The restaurant closed 2 years later. Changed owners, changed names, eventually became a boutique hotel lobby. The frosted glass partition was torn out during renovation. The table where Mencho sat was sold at an estate sale. Nobody who bought it knew its history, but the staff remembered. The waiters talked about it for years. The chef told the story at dinner parties. The bartender, a woman named Claudia, said something that I think captures the whole encounter better than anything else. She said, "I've worked in restaurants my whole life. I've served politicians, actors, billionaires. Nobody changes the feeling of a room. But that night, two men sat in the same building, and the building couldn't hold them both. The walls felt thinner, the ceiling felt lower, and when the big one, Tyson, walked to the back, I thought the floor was going to crack, not from his weight, from what he was carrying." Here's the truth about that night. Nobody won, nobody lost, nobody threw a punch or fired a shot or made a threat that stuck. Two men met, measured each other, and chose to walk away. And in a world that demands spectacle, that demands blood, that demands one man standing over another, that quiet choice is the most powerful thing either of them ever did. Tyson flew out of Mexico City the next morning. He went back to the States, back to his pigeons, back to the slow process of rebuilding a life that boxing had given him and then stolen back. He'd go on to make his podcast, appear in movies, write a memoir, grow mushrooms, and eventually fight Roy Jones Jr. in an exhibition that made him feel alive again for 8 rounds. Mencho went further underground. The CJNG expanded into one of the largest criminal organizations in the world. His bounty grew. His legend grew. The violence escalated. Drone attacks on police convoys, car bombs, territory wars that turned Mexican states into combat zones. He became the ghost that entire governments couldn't catch. 2 trajectories, one toward redemption or something close to it, one toward an endgame that hasn't arrived yet but that everyone knows is coming. And for 45 minutes, in a Polanco restaurant, those trajectories intersected over steak and tequila, and the shared understanding that power is the most expensive thing a man can own. If this story hit you different, if you felt something in that room through the screen, then subscribe to this channel right now. Tap the button. We tell stories here that nobody else will touch, real stories about real power and the real people who wield it. Subscribe, and I'll keep bringing you the ones that matter. Here's one more thing I need to tell you. About a year after this dinner, Tyson was at a charity event in Las Vegas. A reporter cornered him and asked about Mexico City. not about the promotional event. About the rumors, the restaurant, the name that nobody wanted to say on camera. Tyson looked at the reporter. His face did something complicated. Not anger, not nostalgia. Something heavier. You want me to talk about that? People are curious, Mike. People are always curious about rooms they'd never walk into. And that was it. He turned and walked away. Same walk, same decision with every step. Same refusal to perform for anyone's expectation. You want to know the real takeaway? Here it is. Mike Tyson spent his entire career being told he was a weapon, a tool, something to be pointed at other men for profit. Don King did it. Promoters did it. Television networks did it. Even Cuss, who loved him, shaped him into something designed for destruction. And Mencho's lieutenant tried to do it too. Tried to reduce the most dynamic fighter who ever lived to a performing animal. And Tyson said no. In a room where no wouldn't seem to be an option. Surrounded by men who could have ended him. With every logical reason to play along, to smile, to be charming, to survive. He said no. Because at some point between losing everything and sitting in that restaurant, Mike Tyson had decided that being owned was worse than being dead. That's the legend. Not a knockout, not a brawl, not gunfire or chaos or Hollywood action. The legend is a man who walked into the most dangerous room on the continent, looked power in the face, and refused to be anything other than himself. The frosted glass is gone. The restaurant is gone. The people who were there are scattered across countries and continents and, in some cases, graves. But the story survives. It travels through whisper networks and late-night conversations and now through your screen. Mike Tyson sat across from Mencho. They talked about fear. They talked about birds. They shook hands. And then they walked away from each other, carrying the weight of the same knowledge that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a fist or a gun or a cartel. It's a man who knows exactly what he is and doesn't look away. That's the story. That's what happened. And no matter how many times it gets told, no matter how many details shift and morph and get exaggerated by people who weren't there, the core of it stays the same. 2 men, 1 room, no violence, and a handshake that meant more than any punch either of them ever threw. Stay dangerous. Stay human. And if you're ever in a room that's bigger than you are, don't run. Don't fold. Stand up. Walk forward. And be exactly who you are, because that's the only thing that's ever saved anyone